Hey, all right. Awesome. So excited that we get to do this, everyone. Welcome to the Seed&Spark Lunch and Learn session with Black Queer Storytellers. I'm the moderator for today. My name is Chance Calloway, probably best known as the creator and showrunner of the digital series Pretty Dudes. I also run the streaming service Stupid Ambitious. I write things. You may have seen me sing some places, but I am definitely not the most interesting person here. I'm here with three of the coolest people that I could not wait to interact with and talk with today. So I'll let them introduce themselves. We'll start with you, Leslie. Go ahead.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? My name is Leslie Foster. I'm an experimental filmmaker who's based in LA. I work a lot with experimental film, creating dreamscapes and installation spaces. I love creating physical spaces that create alternate universes that allow audiences to kind of dream about better futures in alternative spaces. And I'm so happy to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation, Chance.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad to have you here. Okay, and Koji, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yes, hi, I'm Koji Kali. I'm a music producer / artist. I've produced for numerous independent artists around the Los Angeles area and recently collaborated with an artist from Nigeria, which was really fun. And yeah, that's pretty much so it.
Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, and then Demetrius, go ahead.
I am the elder statesman here, I suppose. I'm a TV writer and producer, and I have been writing since 1994. I think I sold my first script. And I have a pile of unsold movie and television scripts on my desk currently as we speak.
That's awesome. I'm awesome. Kind of hyped because you worked on some shows that were pretty formative, I would say, for a lot of people of color, like Moesha and Single Ladies. If you don't mind me just kind of starting off by asking you, how have you seen your art forms change as the industry has, I guess, become more welcoming to diversity and inclusion?
First of all, it's just that it's impressive, and it's a welcome change. And there's so many storytellers out there now doing amazing work with LGBT storylines. And when I started, I was, as far as I know, one of only a couple. I was certainly one of only a couple of out gay or lesbian writers on network television. And it was a pretty isolated experience. And even, you know, when there was always, it was like an after school special. Like there wasn't these three-dimensional lives that you see, the storylines that are happening, and you know, the stuff that people like Quincy and DeAndre are doing, or you know, you saw storylines. It was always a special. In the special Moesha episode, in the special, you know, All of Us episode, or the special whatever, you know, you did the gay storyline, and there was never a life after that. And one of the things that I've seen change is that, you know, there is life after either coming out, if there is even any coming out at all. You know, there's much more of a willingness to explore the lives of queer characters, and that's a welcome change from when I first got here.
Well, that's fantastic. Leslie, I would say, like as an independent creator, you probably have more freedom as far as the stories you get to tell. What is, I think, the thing that you find most beneficial about being an independent creative artist?
That's a good question. And I definitely, it's interesting because I feel like I started out kind of in a pathway within the film industry, and very quickly found that I'd really been looking for film more as an artistic medium. And so definitely these days find myself much more in the fine art space, which I really enjoy. But yeah, I think there's, the limit tends to be your collaborators and like the money you have access to, which I think a lot of people can say as well. But I really do get to just kind of explore worlds that I want to. The downside to it is, of course, sometimes it takes a lot longer to get those pieces created. Heavenly Brown Body, which is the latest large piece I finished, which was shown at the Torrance Art Museum in December of last year. I mean, that's a 4-year journey, you know, conceiving the idea, finding the support, pulling the money together. So a lot of times I'm looking at those longer kind of pieces. The nice thing about experimenting, though, is I definitely am finding ways to shorten that process. I've been doing a series of pieces called the Etudes, where I'm just picking a collaborator, one collaborator, a theme, and a location, and that's it. And we're just like going and improvising. And I kind of came up with it because I was like, I am tired of a project taking 4 years. Like, what is a way to create something that is like short, can be beautiful, can really dig into some of these topics, but we do it just in an improv way. So it's been fun experimenting on that side of things too, and I get to play in that space.
That's wonderful. I feel like Koji, you coming from like the music area, you also have more freedom as far as what you're trying to say in your art. How do you find your identity interacting with your artistry in the music realm?
You know, to be honest, it took me a while to really come to terms with my identity through my music. For the longest time, out of shame and like being scared of what my family might think or friends, I would use the pronoun he, him, or, you know, boyfriend and, you know, stuff like that. And I kind of shied away from who I was as an artist, or excuse me, as a person first. So I think just really along with the times of where we are now, like especially in my generation, we're kind of like a, you know, be who you are, don't let anyone tell you anything otherwise, and, you know, stay true to yourself and your art. And I vowed to myself I wanted to start putting the truth in my art so I could help other queer people going forward in the same position as me, who might not have had that person to like tell them, hey, it's okay, it's all right. Like, I know it's hard, but if you just create true art and stay true to yourself, you will touch so many people, and the right people will come around you. And so I think it's also been a growth experience for me. This hasn't always been here, but as of recently, I am truly embracing my identity for sure through my music.
I feel like I really
answered.
relate with that, because what's interesting for me is that I definitely really struggled for quite a while. Like, I definitely came out a little later and struggled with how to express that. But the thing that I found really fascinating is I feel like I was expressing my queerness through my art way before it was coming through in my words, you know? And I think because I got to play in this kind of like visual poetry kind of world, I got to say it really loudly in a way that felt safe at first, which is really interesting way to kind of stick my toes out there.
Right.
And I think we all have that experience. I think that one of the things that I learned, because when I first got to LA, and you know, there was no West Hollywood. You know, I grew up in Memphis and in Saginaw, Michigan. And so I was over what they act like they're going to give you a toaster and a card and your life is going to be fine. Like, you go, like, here's your welcome party. And so you've come out, and you know, you don't realize until much later when you get home after your first Pride parade that the work is just starting, and that coming out is an inside job. And so that's what I learned, that you can come out, but if you haven't done the inside work to being okay with yourself and okay with who and what your identity and how you represent yourself and how you comport yourself every day, if you haven't done that work, then you're going to be coming out again and again and again, and in various ways. And so when you go into a space, at least for me, which is a very hyper masculine heteronormative space where people are used to telling raunchy jokes, and you are the first and you're representing, even when people did not mean to be offensive or did not mean to make the workspace difficult, they did. And there are some people who do not know at this very moment that I almost quit Moesha every single day for 3 months. I would leave there so spiritually wounded by people who I respected and who did not mean me any harm. And I would leave. We filmed the first season. I was a writing assistant at ABC. We filmed it right where they film All My Children. I think it was ABC Prospect, it was called. I would leave there so spiritually and emotionally drained that I would go sit in a cafe in West Hollywood. And I would just sit there. But I didn't feel whole or accepted there either. And so I felt like I was preferencing and privileging different aspects of myself, different times of the day. And so it was, you have to find a way to reconcile all these competing identities. That's the way I felt. And that took some time and some missteps, by the way.
Wow.
I find it interesting that you use the phrase competing identities. As Black queer people, we are often at an intersection of marginalization. That's what I like to say often. And even as recently as this weekend, I think it was like trending on Twitter, this concept that you're Black before you're anything else. So especially in the times that we're in right now, where there are all these Black Lives Matter protests, but it's also Pride Month. Have you ever found that you had to, this is for any of you guys who want to answer, have you ever found that you had to prioritize an aspect of your identity through your art? Like, did people, I know like with my show, for example, it being like a queer-centered storyline, a lot of the Black community was saying that it wouldn't be popular in the Black community, which turned out not to be true. But I was just wondering what what your experiences were with that.
I'd say for me, you're right about one thing, definitely having to prioritize being Black first. Because, the Black community faces so much scrutiny when it comes to being queer. And it's funny because I actually saw someone compare how Black people are towards us as queers to like white supremacy, which it is like stemmed from that, I believe, because like how can you teach your child to hate someone based off of who they are, and my thing is I would think that Black people would be the first to like accept us because we both know what it's like to be at the bottom of the barrel. But then when you're queer, that just puts you even further at the bottom. And I don't know, it's just, I don't know how to answer that.
Yeah. Do you mind if I jump in? I think that putting it in context of part of what's been happening over the last 2 weeks with the marches, there's something very hyper masculine and patriarchal and gender specific about this Black Lives Matter movement. Even when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote the wonderful essay in the LA Times, he talked about fathers and sons and brothers. He only in passing mentioned women and mothers and daughters and sisters. And when I posted it, I put it in brackets. I was like, this is not gender specific.
Right.
And so often for me, when we're as queer artists, we are sometimes, when people talk about Black advancement, we are considered part of the problem in the Black community. Like just by existing, we are part of what is not progressive about the Black community. So as Black lesbians, you are not performing your proper role. As Black men, you are not performing your proper role, and thus you are a detriment to the Black community. And so sometimes we have to educate before we can even begin to participate in the conversation about oppression. Right.
I feel like our growth is being stunted by those that are unaccepting, or that, like Demetrius said, this hyper masculinity sort of community that we have, because that's what Black Lives Matter presents to me first and foremost. Obviously, Black men are getting killed every day, which I understand. But as of recently, I've been seeing the ratios of Black women rising as well, falling victim to these sort of crimes. So, and then again, to add queer on top of that, I have to check where I can go sometimes with my girlfriend, because it's not safe for us, as you can imagine. And Like it just gets really exhausting, and it's very frustrating, especially being a part of the Black community, but also having that barrier of being queer and Black, because
Yeah.
we're very religious people as well. So yeah, it
And
just
you know the joke, we're very religious, but everybody knows, the choir director. Right?
Yes.
And we're all looking like, well,
yes.
wait a minute, nobody's going to say anything. So,
Said as one of those choir directors, yes.
yeah, well,
What?
you're preaching and you're listening to this, and I'm going, okay, so nobody. Okay, we're just going to ignore it. Okay.
Have mercy. Yes, you hit it on the nail. Yes.
It's amazing because I was actually writing something about this just last night. I decided to write a scene set in the church where they were talking about, how if you look in the music ministry, as they call it, that's where you will find pretty much most of the very obviously queer individuals. And everyone just kind of turns a blind eye to it because the music is good, and it cracks me up.
They like our contributions, but
Right.
as long as we don't say anything.
Well, and I think that's what's very interesting about not only the Black Lives Matter movement, but also like movements like Pride, is that they're usually started by the most marginalized of us. Like women have been carrying the banner, women and the queer community have been carrying the banner for Black Lives Matter, since Ferguson, and before. And we all know the story of Pride. They try to whitewash it and say that it was about Judy Garland's funeral and stuff like that. And it's like, no, it wasn't. It was about police brutality. It was about the Black queer women, at Stonewall who were just fed up. And
Right.
and I find it very interesting that the movements get commodified. They turn into things for cisgender, hetero. I think if white people could find a way to take over Black Lives Matter, they would. And I think they're still actively trying to do so.
Yes.
Because people are just still used to the leaders looking a certain way because of what's been ingrained as we've learned through history. We're told that white men have done everything for us and that they have forwarded justice and livelihood and all of that. So I had more thoughts on that than I thought I did. But Leslie, I wanted you to jump in on this. How do you feel in regards to all this?
It's so interesting because as I'm getting, as I'm sure you are, all these texts checking in on me right now. The thing that I've been saying is like, look, with the people I'm connected to, every single week, I hear about somebody who's died. I see one of these videos. There is a list of Black trans women, Black trans men who've been killed. Like Tony McDade, who's saying his name? Like Nina Pop, Monica Diamond. Like these are Black folks who are also killed. And I was like, why this time? And I'm glad that it's happening. But I was like, it feels painful that all these other times it felt like nobody cared, right? And like, there's just a string. So people are checking in on me and I'm like, yeah, it's a little heavier right now, but honestly, this is part of my weekly routine of seeing this.
Yeah, I had to make a post on that very thing. I had a lot of non-white friends sending me quotes from Martin Luther King. And I was like, you're sending them to the wrong person. I know. Like, you have some other people in your life. I remember exactly what he said. I mean, so he came from my community to tell you. So I'm not being, I hope I don't offend you. And some people got offended. Like, as Leslie was saying, this is a part of my reality every day. And Black trans women and men are being murdered, sometimes by the people in the Black community, just for stepping out of their doors. And so, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, I want to make sure, I think we have a responsibility to reinforce that we're not talking about Black men, Black hetero cisgendered men's lives that matter, because in some it's very easy for that to kind of dip into a kind of patriarchal, we're just asking to be treated like white men and keep the same forms of oppression and systemic oppression for everyone else. That's what's hard to address. And what I respect about, I was watching all of your work before I started here, and before we decided to do this, and I realized how into the system my life and my career has been. Meaning there was no independent. Spike Lee made, independent film. But what I admire so much about what you guys are doing is that there's this independent spirit where you don't have to answer to networks and you don't have to go through 1,000, note sessions trying to get one gay character, or explain why it's more than Queer Lives are more than after school special one-off, episodes. I remember trying desperately to get the character that I created on Moesha to recur. And all I kept getting was, but we did that episode. And I was like, but you don't think he's still alive?
Right. Right.
He's got to eat. I mean,
know,
go ahead.
Sorry, and
I didn't mean to cut you off. I was going to say there's definitely a trend in the shows from like the 90s where they would have like these quote unquote gay episode, and you'd see the character, and then that character would never come back, would never matter anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one thing that doesn't sit right with me every time I see a queer storyline, the relationship between the couple is just so like it's always like a troublesome relationship. We can never have like a happy ending. They always end up breaking up. Someone ends up dying or something out of random. Like it's never a consistent storyline of a gay couple. They never like to, I'm grateful for what they've given us because it has taken us time to progress to this point. But I think we need to, for one, get more gay writers in the room so that we can ensure more like screen time because that needs to be seen. We need to have more like substance instead of making someone like, for example, 13 Reasons Why, the season finale ended in someone dying from AIDS who was raped by a man once when he was 6. And he, in this, was supposed to be like 16 or 17. And
Listen,
it was just...
I have 14 reasons why. I'm sorry, continue.
It was dirty. It was just dirty how they did that.
Yeah, it was. And I find that, I keep waiting on Ryan Murphy or Greg Berlanti to call because, they are looking for a diverse queer writing room. But, it never happens. So maybe they're watching now.
There are so many problems with that show in particular, but what I've often found, and it's encouraging that I feel like this movement is helping so many creatives who have time on their hands challenge the system. Amber Riley's leading a really wonderful movement right now where people are speaking up about like the racism that they've, dealt with in the industry. Something that I'm really hoping for, though, is the reminder that it doesn't just stop with one form of, diversity. It's not enough just to have voices of color and Black Indigenous voices. It's not enough just to have queer voices. We need to have our disabled voices. We need to have, women on these shows. It makes a huge difference. With Pretty Dudes, I wrote all of season 1 myself. And season 2, I brought in 2 co-writers, Andrea Lee, who wrote the series Got to Be Real on YouTube, which is amazing. Shout out to Andrea.
Did we lose him?
Filipino man. And, yeah, it was wild kind of having the 3 of us all together and hearing our different perspectives on the same exact thing. And I feel like more writers' rooms, more just creative rooms and energies need to incorporate that. It's very telling. You might write a lyric and then someone interprets that lyric in a completely different way that you had no idea that you were implying. I did want to ask Koji, you have a really fantastic lyric in your song "Sun Goes Down," where you say, "How can I have direction if I can't see my reflection? Nobody knows my name, but they always notice my complexion." I was vibing to your album all night last night, but I wanted to get your thoughts on what kind of drove you to that.
Well, thank you. First and foremost, I can't take credit for that lyric. I actually collaborated with an artist by the name of Psychic Radio, who wrote this song, and her reference was like as her living life as a vampire. But that lyric, it in its own, like it's so like relative to what's happening now. I didn't even, this was before like all of this even took place, like before the whole George Floyd thing and everyone, like that's why I think that record was meant to be made for this time. I don't know where her head was at when she wrote that, but I just feel like we had a sort of like communication. I sent her the instrumental to that beat, which already was a really heavy, like driving force, very bass heavy. And I think it just sounded like one of those records that were meant to be, how do I say it? I don't even know how to put it into words, really. Yeah, she just came up with it off top, I think, just being influenced by the instrumental. We weren't in the same room when she wrote it. I sent her the instrumental, and then like, yeah, you hear me singing in the background. I'm mirroring what she's singing, and also in the chorus, I'm singing "Don't Wanna Wait Till the Sun Goes Down." Like, yeah, it was just a collaboration like that. I honestly wish I knew where her head was at when she wrote that, so I don't have
I'm
the need
sorry,
for that.
you're saying that that lyric was about being a vampire.
Not that lyric, the whole context of the song really is like her traveling through life as like a vampire per se, but that specific lyric there, I think she was saying like as a vampire, like
I
they
think
noticed
it's
my
amazing. Like, well, because I would take that and mean it would mean something totally different to me. And I'm going to
exactly.
keep my meaning for it because
Yeah.
it's so, poignant to my life. And, I just think that's amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Leslie, I think you probably experienced this the same as well, because you were talking about creating different worlds where your art can be interpreted in so many ways. I went to one of your exhibitions, and I was just so moved at some of the visuals that you had created, not even knowing what your meaning was behind them, just knowing what I was taking from them. How do you respond when people kind of react in a way and you're like, well, that's not what I was doing, but okay.
I honestly love it. And this is one of the things that I've loved about being so much more centered in the fine art world than in like the film world, is that like if I go to a premiere, I feel like everybody knows I'm the director, I'm the writer, everybody feels like they have to say nice things to me. I'm at an art show. Most people don't know I'm the artist, especially if it's not the opening. They feel free to say what they want. They do say what they want. It's great. I get to hear all kinds of takes on it. I've definitely had people walk out of pieces and just like cuss me out. Like, again, not knowing it's me, just being like, I can't believe. And I appreciate that. And I like the different range of things. Like, I feel like I'm always treading a balance between like creating a framework, because I do want you to kind of fit into the space, but then within that, I want you to play. So how do I create that kind of sonnet framework? Like, okay, here are the boundaries, but inside of that, I want you to go forth with your kind of like explorations. I mean, I've had people give me sometimes better interpretations than I had originally. So I did a piece, and I think this is the show you're talking about, Chance, called 59, where I worked with 11 different collaborators. I did 11 films in 11 months with 11 different collaborators. They could only be 59 seconds long. So the project was called 59. Ridiculous. I love working with collaborators. I'm never going to do that to myself again. But but in one of the films, I was working with an incredible photographer, filmmaker, Sarah London. And we had this piece, and we'd kind of seen it as the end of a love story between two queer women, and kind of the tension between them as like being black and white, and we built it around that. But we were thinking, this is what a breakup looks like in dream space. I had a kid who went to my alma mater come up, white kid, and he kind of watches it a few times. It's 59 seconds. You can kind of watch through it. He's like, oh, I know what you're talking about here. You're talking about how black artists are invited to the table with white artists, and then they're drained of everything they have, and then they're dismissed from that space. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm gonna say that from now on. But that's also why I don't often like necessarily want to like put a lot of verbiage around my work, because I think, and there is a space for that conversation, but I think especially in the show space, I really want people to play with it. There is something that I was just thinking about too, that Chance, I was glad you brought up disability, because like I'm working in physical space, And like, that's something I still need to do better on. Like, that's something I'm constantly talking about as far as my privilege as an able-bodied person. And so I'm constantly like, how do I build these physical spaces in ways that are fully accessible? I don't have the answers to that yet. Like, I'm still figuring that out. And then one other thing that came up, Demetrius, sorry, I just had like these thoughts, but like, you'd been talking about kind of being, allowed to do the thing within kind of the film industry. And I think the moment I really had my like internal break with like, do I want to continue on this path, was being at a film festival and hearing a Black director who'd worked on like a pretty big kind of family film talking about it. And he was like, look, I did what they allowed me to do. And I'm going to keep doing that. And maybe one day I'll get to do what I want to do. And like, my heart broke. And I was like, I can't do that. I cannot do that.
Wow.
And you kind of become, again, it's part of the system, especially when you work for a network. And that was the ultimate goal, like independent filmmaking and all this exciting stuff that people are doing today. That really wasn't there. And to be quite honest, the pay was really good. And so at some point, I remember getting into an argument once with the network executive because I literally left graduate school and started writing. And so one day you're breaking down, race, class, and gender and talking about all these things in a very, intellectualized way and intellectualizing these problems. And the next day you're supposed to tell like your mama jokes. And I was arguing with the network executive about something that I thought I wanted Moesha to do. And I thought, you can't have young Black girls represented this way, and we have to. And so I'm really, really arguing and trying to make my point on set. And apparently I got on her nerves. And she finally looked at me and said, honey, Moesha is just something to do until the Tide commercial comes on. That's all we really care about. And I was like, oh, wow.
What?
Okay.
Saying the quiet part aloud.
Yeah, so that's really all we care about. We're just trying to get people to the Tide commercial. And so, when you think, even when you try on a sitcom you're trying to make some inroads and into, thinking about the communities that you feel like you're representing, that's not really the concern necessarily of the network or, the production company even. So I am only now at this late stage venturing into independent production because there is so much more freedom. I have a question for Koji though. I was wondering in the music space, and we were talking about queer identities. I mean, as a woman, do you find are you constantly having to prove yourself?
Oh, absolutely. It never ends. Honestly, I've been in sessions where the ratio of men to women were 9 men and then me. And then, I kind of had to make my presence be known. But here's where my mindset is let your talent speak for itself. And so I just make sure I come ready with, the heavy hitting, the beats, like everything. Because if you don't, well, even if you do, honestly, people will still try and mansplain and make it seem as if they know more than you. I come to find when people are threatened by you and your talents, they will make you smaller so you don't see anything above that. So I've been in those situations a lot. With one person in specifics that I will not name, but they were on a TV show, and I worked with them briefly, and I contributed to his wife's project. I contributed 4 albums on her album, 4 records on her album, and I didn't get credited for it. And I think the album sold over 100,000 copies. And that was like my first, I guess, major placement, semi-major. And yeah, I wasn't even credited for it. So after seeing that and after being in the studio with those men that were helping me, quote unquote, I came to find that I wasn't even credited for all the hard work that I put in. But instead, they credited this white producer who didn't really have many more years on me. And I just found that really fascinating. I don't know. I think it's because I'm considered what they call a unicorn. That's what they called me. And, you know, their words, not mine. But I'm like, if I was considered this unicorn, why wouldn't you want to share me with the world and, you know, like expose my talents for what they are, as opposed to being, you know, threatened or fixated on the fact that I'm a woman who is doing a predominantly male job, you know, as a music producer. But yeah, I constantly have to fight for equality and respect. So I've just made sure I like really honed in on my craft to make sure that I'm like always ready. I'm very versatile in what I do as well. I'm not like just one genre specific. That was the other thing too. They were hip hop heads, so they were only like, you know, focused on that. I saw other things for myself, and yeah, that's kind of how that happened. So yeah, but yes, constantly having to prove myself on a daily
I was going to
basis.
say they called you a unicorn, but they must have meant like a genie because they wanted all the benefits and all the things that you could do, and then just act like, oh no, I did it myself.
Exactly.
All the
Exactly.
unintended work.
I remember distinctly too, actually, one of them saying, you know, well, you're our little secret, our secret weapon. So we're not gonna, you know, and I was under the impression that I was gonna get this publishing deal. It was a shitty deal too. They told me how much I was gonna be making, but I'm like, as long as I can get my foot in the door, you know, I was willing to take it. But right now, I've had time to grow, and so I know if I were given that same opportunity, I wouldn't take it. Independence definitely the way to go. So
Yeah. Well, you know, and I know that we're kind of we have this narrative going right now that independent, you know, it's this wonderful, like, you know, pot at the end of the rainbow, so to speak. But my experience, of course, has been very difficult in regards to just, you know, funding, support, you know, promotion and things like that. And probably 3 weeks ago, one of my producers and Andrea, my co-writer, we came up with this really amazing concept for the third season of our show, where we were going to take the pandemic and use it in a way that we didn't think anyone else was going to do, to really give our characters all this growth. And then when the protest started, it really kind of cut right into what we had come up with. And I was really disappointed because I spent a lot of intellectual and
Wait,
emotional
what? I
time.
didn't hear you. You cut out.
Unparalleled. And so I want to ask you guys, how has your artistry had to change, had to evolve with first the pandemic, now, you know, with the protests and the unrest and what I'm calling the revolution that's happening around us?
well, for me, I actually, when the pandemic started, I think I still had a few records that I needed to get done for my album. And I actually collaborated with artists over like Zoom or like FaceTime. And, you know, it was kind of different because they weren't physically here. However, I think it allowed for a new creative energy to kind of come in because we weren't physically with each other. And I don't think the record would have really turned out the way that it did had we have been with each other, strangely enough, physically. But yeah, that's how it's really changed for me, just not being able to be in the studio with artists. Yeah.
Been interesting for me. I had three films that were slated to, three etude projects, a short, that were slated to go in March and canceled all of them. I find that right now I tend to be dipping more into my curatorial practice, curating other artists. But like with my own art practice, I don't know, like I feel like it's kind of just laying fallow right now. I think my art process is like distillation through all kinds of different things. Like over time, it distills into something. And so I've been finding this time to just like dig into things that I haven't done creatively in a long time, like drawing blueprints and like I love baking as a kid. And so I'm like baking like increasingly complicated things just to like, and so it's not necessarily directly something that ties into my art practice, but I think giving myself that space, that recharge is going to do some really interesting things. And like, it's always scary because I have no way to predict what that will look like on the other end, but just kind of being patient with myself, doing more writing too.
For me, the pandemic, I had two projects that I was collaborating on, and one of them I would have taken me to Florida. But oddly enough, the stressors of not having insurance at the time that the pandemic hit. And so like there's a certain like what's going to happen, and there's this there's this fear that you have that kind of becomes overwhelming. So then, first of all, we live in a 24-hour news cycle that is constantly telling you that the world is going to end and everything that you know is going to be destroyed. But then you're looking at this and you're beginning to see the way that the pandemic is hitting different communities and how people are surviving it and getting through it. You know, people with health insurance versus people without health insurance, and then the things that you would have to do to get health insurance would put you directly in the path of the pandemic. And so it was hard to be creative at first. Like at one point, I was just like, I really am not in a space. And then the protests started. And so that was an added anxiety onto anxiety that was already there. And so then when you add that onto it, I'm not, what did James Baldwin said something about, you know, I'm not trying to paint myself as, you know, the consummate victim here, but already the anxiety of being queer and trying to create queer three-dimensional characters to people, like almost everyone I'm collaborating with is not queer. And so I'm trying to explain to them, like historically, so most of them are white and most of them are not queer, and trying to explain to them the significance of trying to create historically. So one of them is a historical piece and the historical accuracy of something. And they asked me literally to take the politics out of it. Can we just concentrate on, and I can't, I'm searching for my words because I don't want to give the project away, but can we just concentrate on the prosperity of this particular era and not the politics around, like the fact that, okay, yes, this was a prosperous era in the history with Black people in it, but that era, that prosperity was also surrounded by a lot of poverty and racism. And it was created, this area was created, it was redlined. So it had to exist. And so they didn't want to concentrate on the fact that politically it had to exist. They just wanted to concentrate on the fact that it did well with the limitations that it was given. And I found that somewhat insulting and dispiriting. But, you know, yeah, they were investing in the project, so.
Something that just makes me think about is that with the difficulty of this moment, with the things that we're talking about, with the things we're imagining, you know, it really does add that level of like, no, everything is political and we must remember that. But I think also like, this is a space for artists to really start pushing, because you're talking about things like prison and police abolition. And I think we have to be the people to create imagination around those things. You know, Tony Cade Bambara said, the role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. And I love that quote, because I think often like you're having these conversations, like, I can't imagine what that looks like. I don't know what that looks like. How does this work? And I think that's our space as artists to go ahead and create those worlds, you know, create the new Star Treks in which we get to see the world. And like someone was asking me, like, what medium should we use? I think we should use all the media that are available to us, you know, the experimental film, the painting, the film, like every range of it, because that's how we build imagination for people around us.
That's how we build, that's how we reach people. I feel like right now, one of the gold standards for that was just the way that they were able to incorporate things like the Tulsa riots and concepts of race and religion and all these kind of things.
And it was we didn't hear you. What was?
Oh, sorry. Can you guys see me okay now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I was saying the Watchmen Limited series, I think, was a perfect example of.
I love Regina King.
Yeah. Oh yes, she was so great.
Killed it.
Yeah, and the way they were able to incorporate the Tulsa riots and all these kinds of things and still make it entertainment, but it was rich entertainment. You know, they had an episode that centered on a Black gay superhero, and I was just thinking, I had been waiting my whole life for this, and I did not even know. You know,
impressive. Wow.
It was so good. It was probably like the first like perfect hour of television I've ever watched, and I feel like more art should be willing to take those kinds of risks, especially more mainstream art, because there's the benefit of having the reach, you know. Like I think about the young gay kids who were probably impacted by the Moesha episode, you know, and just like, wow, you were able to do that. Maybe not in all of the terms that you wanted to, but you were still able to provide that representation. I did want to say, I know we've got about 15 minutes left. So if anyone watching wants to send in any questions or comments, we're going to take like the last 10 minutes and we'll answer your questions. So please, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, just go ahead and send those to us. Yeah, I wanted to ask, actually, since the Moesha episode is probably so profound as far as your queerness, Demetrius, what have you seen in your career since then that has been able to challenge you artistically, that you've been proud of like that?
You know, what's so interesting about that episode, it remains, I still get letters. I got a letter, a private message on Facebook from a guy in Britain who said, I just wanted to thank you because I was a teenager and I was alone and I was scared. And I got this episode, I saw this episode. It remains the thing that I still get complimented on to this day. And it was a collaborative, you know, experience. I mean, I did pitch the episode and I wrote it, but Sarah Finney and Vita Spears were the executive producers, and they certainly gave me the permission to do it. And Ralph Farquhar, all three of them, you know, at that time they didn't have to. But, you know, since then, you know, it was very different writing for Single Ladies, because there was a gay character on Single Ladies in a much more progressive era. And so it wasn't as revolutionary. And in between that, you've had stuff like the DL Chronicles and stuff that other artists have done, which is much more three-dimensional than a 30-minute TV show. I'm working on some stuff now that I think is interesting, but you know, I'm going the independent route. So I'm having a much more difficult time getting that made, because it is predominantly Black, predominantly queer, and predominantly historical. So we'll see what happens. I don't know if I answered your question. I'm sorry.
I think you did.
I can go on.
No, that was wonderful. You covered it. You covered it. Leslie,
I do want to mention something that Leslie touched on earlier about, but both of you talked about people with disabilities. And I don't know if you guys know, Rodney Evans has a fantastic film called Vision Portraits, and it's about queer people who are queer who are losing their sight, and he's losing his sight. And it's a fantastic film. If you guys haven't seen it, I just wanted to give a shout out to Rodney. It's fantastic.
He wrote just added that to my list.
Huh?
Yeah. There's a filmmaker that I've worked with in the past, Dickie Hartz, who is he's a person of color, and he's deaf, and he's always making amazing art that I feel like should have more of a platform. I know a lot of times he'll submit to things and sort of contracts kind of like tie up his art so it doesn't actually get out to be seen. But if any of you guys can find any of his stuff online, he's amazing. I know.
What's the name again?
Dickie Hartz is his name.
Okay. And
he was recently on, I think, Grace and Frankie and the Tales of the City. His own stuff is amazing. Leslie, I wanted to ask you, you work with the Level Ground collective, and I know that a big portion of what Level Ground does is push for artistry from people maybe who are less represented. So just what's your experience been with Level Ground?
Oh, it's been amazing. I've been involved with Level Ground for 7 years now, I think, from the beginning. It started out as a film festival and has evolved over time to becoming kind of a art collective. And I get to run the art residency program, which is an incredible honor. I was the first artist in residence, and Samantha, who runs it, is I feel like is always plotting good things for my life. And so as I wrapped up my art residency year, she was like, hey, I want you to come on and run the art residency. and pulled me on. So I've been running that. And it's amazing to be able to bring in 3 artists or so a year and often get them their first solo shows in a gallery, you know, work with them across the year to get these projects that are just like mind-blowingly cool. I mean, people are working with all kinds of stuff. We've, you know, worked with an artist, Ray, and they were working with portraits, working with like sex workers. And in the queer porn industry, we've worked with artists who are doing like interactive work to talk about what it's like to be in surveillance culture and be a brown person in surveillance culture. It's the artists blow me away on a constant basis, and I learn so much from them. So I'm really grateful to be able to do that work.
Awesome. Okay, I guess we'll open it up to the questions now. There was a comment actually that we got from Gregory where he was talking about that quote about the role of an artist, and he says that it describes this moment for us as queer filmmakers and artists, that we should make sure that Black queer people lead these protests, that we tell these stories and benefit from the revolution to come. And I think that's a really great concept, especially the idea of benefiting from it. A lot of times we'll implement change, and the change makers aren't the ones that actually get to experience the results. That whole, you know, like Moses leading people to the promised land, but then he couldn't go in. And I think about, someone was talking about how like Malcolm and Martin and all these Medgar, they didn't live to see 40. You know, they didn't live to see the changes that they were making. And I feel like that's a bold way to have a revolution, is to like say, I also deserve to reap the benefits of this revolution. So thank you for sharing that, Gregory. All right, and the other F word asked, I love that name. Why do you make the work that you make? So I guess I'll open that up to everybody.
Well, I create because it's really my way of existing. It's my contribution to the world, because that's something that I'm good at. I feel like there's no explanation for the talent that I have, because I wasn't taught this. I think it was just more so something that I had at birth. So I do it to live. I do it to inspire others, especially the role that I play in the music industry as a female music producer, and just to bring light into people's lives, honestly. Obviously, music curates emotions and stuff like that as well. So I want to contribute to people's happiness and, you know, make them dance, make them smile, you know. Yeah.
Awesome. What about you?
I feel like
I wrote my first short story in the 2nd grade, and the teacher said that it was the only one that was worth grading, and she read it to the class. And either I was a good writer or I got hooked on the attention. And so I've been writing ever since. And it's you know, I have these inner voices in my head. And I remember when I cried at the opening of the movie Moonlight, because that was me. I used to get chased home just like that. And but I had a grandmother who was a little more forceful about how I should respond, and that's a whole different, we could have a whole conversation because she didn't take any mess, and she taught me not to. But that was me, and I don't think I could exist without writing. It is the way that I express myself, and it's the way that I work out things in my head about how I explain the world to myself.
Yes, awesome.
I think what you both said, the fact that this is the way we live, I think I resonate with that so much. I don't know if I could live without this. For me, you know, especially when I was a kid, you know, having these feelings and not having words for them, being a bisexual, queer, Black person, growing up in Southeast Asia, you know, just like all these like experiences and not having any language for them, and like finding a language ultimately. Like, this is the language in which I can express the world to other people. This is a language that's beyond kind of spoken words for me. And then beyond that, hopefully I can use it to provoke imagination, to open up space, to, when I am able to step into space, open up space behind me. So to use it as a way of expression, and then as a tool to broaden worlds. At least that's my hope.
I always find myself at war with words. I mean, and the English language, I always feel like I'm trying to bend it and to contort it to something that it does not currently represent. And so the best thing that I can do is to try and put it on paper in a way that both expresses what I'm trying to get out and is received by someone who was not prepared to hear that in that way.
Ooh, I'm going to write that down. I'm going to watch the playback of this. I'm going to write that down.
I always like telling the story about an artist who's at an opening and someone comes up to the artist and says, "Could you explain this painting?" And the artist looks and says, "If I could have explained it in words, I wouldn't have painted it."
Yeah.
And I feel like that's often the place where I'm at.
The accuracy, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I often say that, like, my first language was art. My first language was music. They didn't have to spank me when I was born. I came out, you know.
Right
and
on.
I feel like to this day, that's still the best way I can ever express myself is through some form of artistry.
Yeah.
Okay. We got one last question. I'm going to try to, actually, I don't think we have another question. Did anyone have any other questions? I don't want to skip anyone.
I just want to say it was wonderful. I feel like I've met 3 wonderful people, and I'm so glad that I got asked to do this. I think Chance and I met after something he posted on Twitter.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, sure, I'll do it. But I really, really, really am impressed by the work that you guys are doing, and I hope we can keep in contact.
Same here. I was really touched individually by each of your stories and just hearing your perspectives and how you've, lived life and how you've used your art to kind of move through life is really inspiring. So thank you all so much for the opportunity.
Ditto.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I think we have a question.
Oh, yeah, we do have a question. Okay. Let's see. Lizzie wants to ask, what is one example of a way art has helped you feel confident in your identity? Does it allow for fluid growth and change?
I think the first time, again, that I decided to change the pronoun in my music is what made me more confident in my identity. And just really surrounding myself with more queer people and seeing them and how they live their life so free. I wanted that same sort of freedom, and I realized the only person that was burdening that was myself. And again, it was merely because of what I was afraid of what my family would think or what friends would think. I was heavily into church at that time, still spiritual, not religious, and I think it was just being around people that really helped, like, bring that out of me.
It's important, what you said hits home for me, because if you look at the episode that I wrote 20-some years ago, he never says he's gay. He whispers it to his cousin. He never says it. And I've learned over this time, you have to say it. And I didn't want him to say it. I thought then that it was important that he not say it because it shouldn't matter, but it does matter. And if I could redo that episode today, I would have him say it.
I'm going to interrupt real quick just to say I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't think we had time to cover it, but I was reading an essay about that episode actually, where you were talking about that, and I thought that it was a unique kind of progressiveness for the 90s that I don't feel like would work now, but I felt like it worked for what it was then. I thought that was a powerful statement.
No regrets.
Yeah, true. Thank you.
Yeah, Leslie.
Let's see. It's a good question. I'm thinking about it. I think for me, to kind of touch back to something I said earlier, art was a way for me to explore my queerness before I was saying it verbally. It's interesting though, like as I look back, like there's definitely shift in it. I think earlier on, I was definitely, I've had this kind of interesting arc where I was like really in your face politically with my art early on. And then I moved into the space where I was like, no, I want to do everything more subtly. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think you kind of have to follow that artistic voice where it leads. But I feel like now I'm coming back into a space where I kind of want to like be pretty on the nose, but maybe combine the lessons I've learned and find ways to kind of bring that kind of surreality, that dream space into that kind of obviousness and bring that together. But I think I'm at a place where I feel like this is important for my practice at the time. But I feel like there's always shift in art, and I think that's the beautiful thing. I think if we are continuing to do the same thing, if our practice looks the way it does now in a decade, we haven't listened to where our own guts, our own muses are telling us to go. And I think we have to really do that.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
Agreed.
I would say my answer to this question would be that I found, I guess in the long-about way, was that the more specific I would get about my experiences through my art, the more universal my experiences seem to be. You know, like if I would tell something that I was like, oh, this feels really direct and this feels very personal, those would be the moments that seem to impact the most people. I would get the most messages about, the most emails, conversations in person. And I was really surprised. I had an episode of the show where a Black character is having sex with his white partner, and she starts fetishizing him like in the middle of sex. And I was like, I don't know how this is going to play, because this is a very chance kind of thing that happened. And I got so many messages from people of all sexualities who had had similar experiences. And I was in shock because, you know, to me, it felt so personal that it had to be absurd. So I made the scene absurd, and then people took it in a very real way. And I found that that's kind of what happened with the stories I was telling. It's the more personal I got, the more I realized I wasn't alone in these kind of experiences that, you know, we're told not to talk about, or we're told just to deal with. And I realized that art is probably the only way I would ever be able to kind of exhume or exercise that out of myself. So
art is an excavation.
Yes.
Agreed.
Absolutely. Okay, yay! I'm so glad. I mean, I really wanted to connect. I know, me and Leslie have talked about getting coffee, and me and Koji met, and we were like, yeah, we've got to meet back up. And then, I disappeared from the world for a while. So I'm glad that we got to connect. Like Demetrius said, I feel like, I want to stay connected with you guys. And thanks to Seed&Spark for making this possible with you guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Seed&Spark.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Yeah.
Shay.
Yeah, we appreciate you guys. We're going to sign off. Make sure you're following Seed&Spark. They do the Lunch&Learns, I think, every week. But follow them, because I might have that wrong. And then also follow all of our panelists here and their social medias. Go watch their art, support their art. And yeah, and I think if there's nothing else, I think we can just say goodbye. So much love.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Thank you guys so much. Have a great day.
Have a great day.
Appreciate it.